beautiful souls. This is Quinn Curtis, and you're listening to Joyful Living. And today I am joined by a very awesome guest. His name is Greg Marcus, and he's the founder of American Mussar, which you're going to hear about more later. But it is just the coolest thing. Ever since Greg connected with me and sent me his book, I have absolutely been obsessed. This is not an understatement. As people in my intermediate life know, I've been talking about it nonstop ever since. So I'm just so excited to be having this conversation with Greg today, with you guys as well, listening, and to share the massive value that is here and how this is going to open up your world in really cool ways to experience more everyday joyful living. So Greg, officially welcome to Joyful Living. We're so happy you're here.
Well, thank you, Quinn. I'm delighted to be here myself.
Oh, good. Thank you. Well, let me tell everybody a little bit more about you, and then we'll dive into our conversation. So Greg is an innovative Mussar maven and the creator of American Mussar, a 21st century spiritual practice for an authentic and meaningful life. He is a graduate of the Mussar Institute's Facilitator Training Program and has been practicing and teaching for 6 years. Greg offers guidance on how to lead a life of mindful harmony and spiritual integrity, drawing upon Jewish teachings and contemporary wisdom alike. He has a PhD from MIT and worked for 10 years as a marketer in Silicon Valley before becoming a stay-at-home dad, writer, and speaker. Greg's award-winning book, The Spiritual Practice of Good Actions, Finding Balance Through the Soul Traits of Mussar, has been praised for making Mussar accessible to people of all backgrounds. This is going to be such a cool conversation. So before we really dive into what Mussar is and why this is so cool, I would love to get a little bit more of a taste of who you are and what joyful living means to you. So I'm going to ask you the question we ask all of our guests on the show, which is, what does joyful living look and feel like to you? And while you're thinking for a minute, I'll just let everybody know the premise of this question is that really with our show, we really try to teach and to share how joyful living is not a one-size-fits-all answer, and how a lot of us have been kind of spoon-fed that idea that joyful living looks like when you've got all your ducks in a row and you've got the right house and you've lost those 30 pounds and you've got the promotion at work or whatever it might be. But really our true joy comes into as we tap into what joyful living looks like for each one of us. So tell us a little bit about Greg's flavor of joyful living.
Well, thank you, Quinn. And that's actually a great question for me. And it was one of the reasons why I was excited to connect with you, because I have had a hard time kind of experiencing joy in my life sometimes. Like, I tend to really focus on all of my mistakes and all of the areas where things can go wrong. And one of the things that Mussar teaches is that joy is inside of us, and if we just get out of our own way, it can emerge. And I have to say that really confused me and bothered me. I was like, what the heck is this talking about? But I have to say, over the last couple of years, as I've been able to kind of quiet some of the things that make me frustrated, it's just kind of joyful. It's just like, for me, it's just kind of like sitting and kind of looking over sideways at one of my teenage daughters and smiling at them as they don't know that I'm looking at them, as they're, in a very serious teen activity on their phone or something, or just kind of hanging out with the cat on my lap and, being able to hang with my wife and read a good book. And that's, if I'm connecting with other people, and that's what joyful living is for me.
I love that. And I'm excited for how this conversation is going to help everybody open up to greater connection in their relationships, because there's two main pillars of joyful living in my perspective. And you're right. It just emerges. It's inside of us. It's natural to us when we just get all the other stuff out of the way or stop long enough to feel it. Right. And so those two pillars of joyful living in my experience have been soulful expression and meaningful connection. And so I love that you're bringing that connection piece. And I appreciate you voicing how joyful living hasn't always been something that's been easy for you. I actually think you're one of the first guests to really say that, which is so funny because we talk about it all the time. And in their stories, they share that. But I appreciate your honesty, because I know a lot of the people listening can relate to that and probably had a big sigh of relief of like, oh, if Greg is there too, like I'm okay. So thank you, Greg.
Oh, you're welcome. And it can become like its own thing. It's like, well, geez, all these other people are like living these joyous lives. Why, what's wrong with me? And, oh yeah, I'm the problem. That's why I don't even deserve a joyful life. And those are some of those tapes and some of those habits and spiritual imbalances, which are just hiding the truth about how wonderful we are and when we can allow that joy to emerge.
I love that. And I'm just seeing what a perfect lead in this is into our conversation about Mussar and this cool practice that you've really dialed into. Because one of the pieces that I love about it, and I'd love for you to take a moment and explain it to everybody first, but I love how it really does help you get out of that comparison game, right? And instead of attaching to the idealistic version of everything, you're just staying in your own lane more. So without me, I just am eager to get in there, but without me going there any further, would you mind explaining, just giving us a little background and foundation on what Mussar is, and maybe even a little of your story of how you came into it and how it, and that journey for you?
Sure. So Mussar is a Jewish spiritual practice that goes back, between 1,000 and 2,000 years. And the idea is, like many of your listeners may have heard of Kabbalah, which is kind of Jewish spiritual mystical, and Mussar is Jewish spiritual practical. So it focuses very much on everyday life. How can we find those things inside ourselves that cause us to get stuck in the same situation again and again? I call these things soul traits, as do some others, and there's some Hebrew words, but I tend, as I explain Mussar, I just do everything in English because that makes it more, I think, accessible to the broader community. So it helps us find those things inside that cause us to get stuck, and then it offers us a path towards balance and healing by taking mindful action in everyday life. Like let's take a practical example. So what we do is we focus on different soul traits. So one soul trait is patience. Others are humility, trust, order. But when we're focusing on patience, if we have too little patience, that means we're angry and frustrated. But if we have too much patience, that means that maybe we're staying in a bad job or staying in a bad relationship. We're just kind of waiting for the world to come to us when we're not taking action. So the question is, where do I fit along this spectrum? And if I'm finding myself getting really frustrated and angry in traffic, that's that's certainly not joyful living, sitting there pissed off in traffic all the time, right?
Right.
So what one of my students did is we take action to change this. And she said, I'm going to let every car merge in front of me. And within 2 weeks, she went from being like a really angry, rageaholic driver to being what she called the calmest driver in California. She would sing little songs and she'd listen to the radio, and then it started spilling out into other parts of her life where she found herself being more patient with her kids. Because when we're making these changes, we're making changes in the soul. And when we start healing that hole in the soul, then we start to show up differently in all kinds of situations.
I want to just pause you right there because you said so many good nuggets that I'm like, I want to just emphasize a few of these points. So first of all, the main point that got me so excited about this idea initially was the spectrum concept of it. That I hope you guys listening, when you caught that he said, but if you have too much patience, right? So all those soul traits that he was mentioning, like, patience and humility and pride and trust, you can have too much of or too little of. And so often our practices or our beliefs have been wrapped around, well, I just need to be more patient, right? And you end up getting really stuck in some situations, like you mentioned, if you don't start to become a little less patient, right? So it's not about finding the extremes. It's about finding the balance point. And I loved in your book how you say that the concept of God is that God would be the perfect balance point of all of the attributes. And so one of the the soul traits that you had mentioned in the book was of order. And so it got me really thinking like, okay, well, God is a God of order, right? Things are in order. But then I was also feeling like, yeah, but actually life is a lot of chaos too. Like it's messy here, right?
Yeah.
So there's plenty of order, but there's also a lot of messy. And that's what makes it this great adventure. If it was just order or just chaos, it would be really painful. But this harmony point makes it fun, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I love that that kind of way that you frame the order and chaos, because different people have different beliefs about the divinity. But if you believe that the divinity created like all of the laws of nature, that's what means that when I drop my pen, it falls to the ground, because that's part of the law of nature. But it also means like Newton came up with the second law of thermodynamics, which is entropy, which means that my desk is going to get messy unless I'm doing work to keep it orderly. Like that's the way the universe was created. Now, whether you believe that it was created that way by the divine or just that's the way it ended up after the Big Bang, that is the reality of this balance between order and chaos.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I loved also in your book, you mentioned how the many people have claimed that the Jews invented self-help 2,000 years ago and personal development. I thought that's a good point. So when you're thinking of everything that we're sharing in this conversation today and talking through, be thinking of it in that context, that this is really like, powerful self-development and personal work that just makes us better humans and happier communities. And I love the aspect about this practice that instead of it being attached to a denomination or a certain dogma, that we're all, no matter what creed we believe in or what our connection might be with whatever divine flavor we choose, that we can have these conversations and all become better people and happier communities as a result of practicing good actions, meaningful action.
Yeah. Well, that's well said. I sort of feel like my job is to be kind of a conduit and a facilitator for this information. Like I have my journey that I'm on.
Yeah.
And then I share, I hold up my hand and invite other people to come join me. And it's joined me in being in conversation with some of these rabbis and sages and philosophers and teachings that go back thousands of years. And that's one of the, features of the kind of Jewish ethical tradition, that we are in conversation with these people who lived thousands of years ago. And in the Jewish texts, they'd say, well, the predominant position is A, but Rabbi so-and-so thought B. And even though he got outvoted, we're still going to remember B's perspective, because maybe down the road, it's kind of like a minority opinion on the Supreme Court, right? It still has something to say, and it might speak to certain people. So having, the ability of all people to be part of like this great ethical conversation and this great personal development conversation, because there's a lot of smart people that have been thinking about this stuff and teaching on this stuff for a long time. And if we're still looking at it 1,000 years later or 5,000 years later, it's probably because there's some truth to it.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, I love that perspective. And it makes me wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about how it opened up in your world. Especially, you have a PhD from MIT. You were working in Silicon Valley, like the hotbed of hustle and let's get going and let's create big things. And now you've totally shifted gears. Like maybe tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so I was... after I did my PhD, it was in biology, and I came out to the San Francisco Bay Area and I did a postdoc, and I pretty quickly joined the biotech industry. And within the biotech industry, I gravitated towards marketing. And I loved it. I loved the idea of changing the world and making medicine better through these technologies. And I loved it so much that I became a workaholic. I was working 90 hours a week. And I thought everything was great. And yeah, my wife and 2 little kids weren't thrilled about it, but it didn't, it's just the way I thought it was the way it had to be. until I became a scapegoat for a product launch that went bad. And I got publicly humiliated by a president of the company. I had to go to a trade show and for hours defend the product that wasn't working and tap dance. And then that night, my grandmother passed away. So things were just piling on and piling on. I was really down. And right around that time, it was the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, which is a day of fasting and reflection on your life and saying, what can I do better? And it was during this reflection process that they were reading from the service, and I glanced down at the translation, and these words jumped out at me: don't turn to idols or molten things. And I have to say, my first reaction was really dismissive. I'm thinking, geez, my life is falling apart, and then here I am listening to them talk about these stupid statues. But then, I was like, come on, let's get real here. I have issues to deal with. And then this phrase jumped into my head. It was like this quiet voice, and it said, you need to do what's best for the company. And when I heard that, like my stomach clenched and my palms got really sweaty, because that's the phrase we use to rationalize decisions like firing people or canceling projects or shipping things that weren't really ready to go. And I realized I turned my employer into a false idol. That doing what's best for the company, it's not doing what's best. It's not what's best for me. It's not what's best for my family. It wasn't best for anybody. So I decided that day I was not going to do what's best for the company anymore. I was going to start putting people first. I was going to start realigning with the values that I've been raised with. And within a year, I'd cut my hours by a third. A year later, and I hadn't changed jobs. Same employer, same job. A year later, I cut my hours by a third again. And while I didn't realize it at the time, that is what started putting me on the spiritual path that I'm on today.
Wow. And then what was the connection with Mussar within this? How did that come into the picture?
Yeah, so Mussar kind of came along a few years later. I eventually left the corporate world, and that's when I became the stay-at-home dad and a writer. And my first book was called Busting Your Corporate Idol, Self-Help for the Chronically Overworked. And it was all about how I stopped working all the time. It was all these gradual changes. Like the first change I made was I said, okay, my health is more important than work, so I need to stop working at 9:30 so I can get a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
And then I want to spend time with my wife, so I'll stop at 9. And all of a sudden, after 6 months, I was stopping at 7 at night. And so then I learned about Mussar at my synagogue, at a family education program that we were a part of. And Mussar is all about these kind of small, gradual changes that you can make, and reinforced by these kind of Jewish values and Jewish teachings. I'm like, wow, I know what that is. I know what that's about. And then I learned about the spectrum thing, which you said really caught you, and that caught me as well. So then I did nothing. I just kind of went along for 2 years, and I kept thinking about it all the time. And I kept thinking, wow, this could really help me. Like, wow, this could change my life. And I did nothing. I kept suffering and just kept going along. And then finally I worked up my courage, and I went to one of the rabbis and said, I really want to teach Mussar here. And she said, oh, that's fantastic. And I said, and I need to learn Mussar first. And she said, okay, well, great. And then she paid for me to take a class, which I took online. And then I created my own. I started reading everything I could get once the door was open, I couldn't get enough of it. And I created my own Mussar class at the synagogue. It was called Work-Life Balance Through Mussar. And we met for 5 times. And everybody said, oh, that's great. Let's keep going. So then we met 5 more, and then we met 5 more. And after a couple of years, I had enough materials that I just kind of put it together and wrote the book. And then I made Mussar kind of my full-time project.
Love it. And I'd love if you wouldn't mind sharing your bigger vision with it of, with bringing it to the world or to more people. What are you hoping happens as a result?
Yeah. So as I've worked with, so I bring it forward in a number of ways. I have created a curriculum for parents to use. I have some courses on my book. I do workshops. I do other things. But what I've seen over and over again for the people that I worked with, it takes them from wherever they are to a thriving life. And so my vision is to really make this practice accessible to as many people who want to participate. And there's a certain, there's no wave a magic wand in this world, but it is such a, if you have the courage to just look within and to make some really gentle changes, you are heartily invited to kind of to join the party and to see how quickly that your life can change by taking really small steps. Like, again, my student in the driving, I mean, she's driving anyway. That took her no extra time.
Yeah.
It was just kind of slowing down and thinking about it and saying, okay, well, if I want to balance patience, what's a tweak I can make? And then boom, life changed.
Yeah. Which I think would be so valuable to have you explain next, what the practice is that you're teaching with how you work with the virtues over the course of time. Would you mind explaining what that looks like
Yeah.
And then the larger practice?
Yeah, sure. So usually we work on a cycle of 13 different soul traits or character traits, as they're sometimes called. And you'd work on each one for 2 weeks at a time. And during that 2 weeks, every morning you would get up and you would have, on an index card, you would write down like a little recitation phrase. Or I have like some pre-printed, these like very pretty pre-printed cards that people can use. And so you would, oh, there they are.
I'm excited. I just got mine. Yay.
Oh yeah. Aren't they pretty?
They are gorgeous. I'm so excited to use them.
Yeah. And I will say that like part of like Mussar is you can make things really beautiful. We like want to honor the divine in ourselves and the divine in everything. And so you want to bring, beauty brings joy, right? I mean, it's nothing like seeing something really, really pretty. And while there's nothing wrong with writing the phrase on a sticky note or on an index card, I did that for years. There's something a little special about having it pretty. So you would take one of those and you would read it. Like the one for patience, I think, is, "This too shall pass, and I have the strength to get by until it does." So you would read that out loud, or you would chant it out loud for 2 minutes, and then maybe you put like a card in your bathroom so you'd see it in the morning. Maybe you put one in your car so you see it when you're driving. And that helps frame your day, and it sets up the mind to say, okay, where is my patience being challenged today? Then as you go through the day, you sort of look and say, oh, wow, after doing this for 3 or 4 days, it's always waiting in line in the cafeteria. I'm always just, my mind is racing. I'm upset. I'm like, I have to get through this. I have to get back to it. And then it's like, okay, I'm going to pick one area to make a change. Like, it's okay, I'm going to try to practice my patience when I'm standing in line at lunch, because that's where I'm noticing some suffering. Yeah. So when that happens, I'm just going to like breathe. Maybe I'll mumble the mantra to myself. And it's just like, this will pass. I have the strength to endure this. Patience is about enduring a situation that we can't change. The lion is the lion. They have a right for their food too. And if we can kind of let go of that frustration, then all of a sudden you might find that you're just getting in a conversation with a stranger. And what had been this grind of standing in line suddenly becomes like this really joyful connection, just a little nugget of positivity. And then the third part is journaling, which is at the end of the day to get out a journal and just write a few sentences about how your patience was tested during the day and how you dealt with it. Now, this is probably the most challenging part of the practice. Some people are not journalers. I had not been a journaler before I tried this, and but it is also one of the most meaningful. So, more, it's a growth opportunity for many people to do the journaling.
Oh, I love that description. And one of my favorite things about this idea is that you're not saying, oh crap, I am bad at all 13 of these. So I have to, like, where's the boot camp? And I got to do all 13 and be better at all of them tomorrow, right? There's just such grace, I think, in that you're in the practice of this. So for 2 weeks, patience is the one that you're looking at, which kind of means the other ones you do your best in, but you're not like as stressed about, right?
Yeah.
And work on it for 2 weeks. And then the next one comes up. Okay, now it's time to head into the humility 2 weeks, right?
Right.
Where am I at on the spectrum? Not necessarily what's the ideal of humility and how do I be that ideal, but where am I at on the spectrum and what small steps can I take for these 2 weeks? Mm-hmm. And that you mentioned that so many people who have been through this practice, both that you've worked with and have researched, you're improving all along, and you don't go back necessarily to where you were before you started the practice, right? Or it becomes more permanent this way, right?
It does, absolutely. And, so I'm going to move on from patience to enthusiasm or whatever, but still I'm coming at it at a different place. And I've started internalizing some of these changes. And what we know from modern neurobiology is that neurons that fire together wire together. And so what the rabbis described 1,000 years ago as making changes in the soul, today we know is actually rewiring the brain. And we're creating new pathways, and we're allowing other pathways to lie fallow. And, once we do a couple, it's like when you sort of experience that real change between, grumpy in line versus content in line or joyous in line, that's a good reason to keep going.
Oh yeah, so true. Oh, I would love now if you could share with us the 4 American Mussar assumptions, including the one that says we all have a divine spark occluded by our baggage, which we kind of alluded to earlier, but I'd love to hear you describe these in more depth.
Yeah, sure. So one of the ways that I've worked in the book to make this practice accessible is that it's not fair to ask, everybody to learn like 1,000 years of philosophy in order to understand this practice.
Yes.
So because I was a product manager, I had to do a lot of financial forecasts. And when you do a forecast, you make assumptions. 20 customers are going to come in the store every hour, and on average, they're going to spend $100, so we're going to make $2,000 an hour in the store. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not true, but with that assumption, I can make some decisions around my business. Mm-hmm. So what I did is I created these assumptions, which kind of gives you the Mussar backstory. Mm-hmm. So the 4 assumptions are, we all have a divine spark that's occluded by our baggage. We're driven by the battle between the good inclination and the evil inclination. We all have free will, but it's not always accessible. And the 4th one is that we all share the same soul traits, but we have different amounts of each. So you had asked specifically about the divine spark assumption. So that goes all the way back to the book of Genesis, the story of the creation of human beings. And there's a lot that was written about, it says that God created 2 of each of the animals, but it only created 1 human, and then created the woman later. And so part of that idea is to say that on a spiritual level, we're all descended from the same person. We all have... we were created in the divine image. We all have equal value on a spiritual level. And that divinity is part of us and can never be taken away. At the same time, though, we have our baggage. We have those hurts, those scars from mistakes and relationships and other things, and that gets in the way. We might be suspicious, if our heart's been broken, we're going to be maybe a little bit more suspicious when we start dating again. So So what Mussar allows us to do is to move the bags a little bit and to let the light shine through.
I love that. And the other one that was really sticking out that I'm like, oh, I wonder if you could speak more to is the third one about that we all have free will, but it's not always accessible.
Right. Right. So the idea of free will is that I'm the captain of my own ship. I can make decisions, and that is certainly true. But when, like, one of my teenage daughters does something that triggers me and I start yelling, in theory, if my wife does something that makes me mad and I raise my voice or I get angry, in theory, I had free will, but the words were out of my mouth before I even had a chance to think about it. There's just a split-second reaction, and all of a sudden, I'm saying something and say, "Oh my God, I wish I hadn't said that. Oh, geez, that was really, really ugly." Yeah. So, what Mussar allows us to do is what Rabbi Pear would call creating more space between the match and the fuse, to give us just a little bit of extra time to breathe instead of just reacting.
So powerful.
Does that make sense to you?
Space. Yeah, I love that description too, the space between the match and the fuse.
Yeah.
That was so good. What was the fourth again? That one was also standing out.
So that one was that we all have the same soul traits but have different amounts of each.
Yes, so that's perfect, because that's exactly where I was wanting to go into next, as far as, how do you really get a handle on this or kind of plug into it? And on your website, you have a way that people can kind of do a questionnaire and see where they're at in the soul traits, right? And map it out.
Yeah. So the idea behind the assumption is that, we as it says, we all share these traits. And what that really means is that if you see someone who is, let's say, they're always untruthful, or you think of them as a liar, it doesn't mean that they don't have truth. It means that their truth is out of balance. But they have that same capability of telling the truth. And similarly, this is one that surprises people. Well, too much truth can get really unkind and really harsh. And it's like, just because it's true doesn't mean you need to say it, if it's not going to actually benefit anybody. So that person who's telling too much truth or not enough truth, they still have that same capacity as everyone else. And when we understand that I have my flaws, they have their flaws, and we all have an opportunity to do better, it just changes the way we relate and view to other people. So the most important part of Mussar practice is not worrying about, is for me to worry about my own spiritual journey. So on my website, I have I've created a little quiz where you can generate a soul trait profile, where you look at the 13 different soul traits that are in my book, and you can get an evaluation from low to high for each one. And then it creates like a really cool little graph to give you a snapshot. And it's a first step in a kind of a fun way to start looking within and seeing, well, maybe what are some things I should be working on or focusing on.
If anybody could see it. If you're watching the video, I'm going to show a little bit from the book so you can see what that map kind of looks like. It's that circle point that would be the balance point. And so that you can see which ones are a little bit less versus which ones are more.
Yeah, and if you could hold that up again, Quinn, let me just explain what people are looking at.
Sure, yeah.
So each spoke is one of the different soul traits. And then you have a point on the diagram where it's kind of high or low. And and then you get like a unique graph. That's your own unique snapshot of what you think your soul balance looks like right now.
So cool. And so they can go to your website, AmericanMussar.com.
Yeah, they go to AmericanMussar.com and click on the soul trait link, and it's absolutely free. And then, you can take the quiz, and then I'll send you some information about how to interpret it.
So I I love, I was trying to actually find the right spot in the book because it just came to my mind, but I loved how you defined what, like Jewish, you've mentioned it a couple of times in the interview. I want to find the right word, like Jewish practice, values. Maybe it was that, maybe the Jewish values or beliefs. But you, in the book, you said the best like definition of it was, which was, I'm losing it now. If there's anything coming to you, but kind of related to this, you had said this piece in the book that said that Judaism is a religion of deed, not creed.
That's right.
So you're saying in Mussar, it teaches it's not okay to hurt someone's feelings, even if we mean well. In other words, our good intentions do not excuse a bad outcome. In fact, the disparity between the intentions and outcomes points to an opportunity for growth. So powerful. So I was thinking that the way you had described the Jewish philosophy, maybe that's the better language, was something related to that, where it's like being kind. Do you know what I'm referring to, or am I stressed?
Yeah. No, it's really it is really about a deed, not creed. It's not like you need to believe in someone or believe in something. It's really how you act and how you show up in life. And how you, like within Judaism, there's more traditional and less traditional branches, and the more traditional branches have some very specific ways to act and some specific ways to eat, but that's all part of this philosophy about, and then there's more liberal denominations of Judaism which say, well, those traditional practices are not essential, but the sanctity, the infinite value of human life, the repairing of the world, the speaking kindly to people, all of these ethical ways of acting are still absolutely core and critical.
So good. So good. And I love also that you mentioned how with Mussar, it turns real world situations into opportunities for spiritual growth, which in turn make the world a better place.
Yes.
So good. Anything you'd like to speak to with that concept?
Yeah. So we all, again, it kind of goes back to this Judaism philosophy where it's not about just kind of going off on the mountain and meditating and blissing out. I mean, that's like a situation where many people could find it easy to kind of feel relaxed and okay. Although a lot of non-meditators, that probably sounds like totally boring and a nightmare. But, but like setting things up perfectly and then feeling good. But the reality is that life is messy. Mm-hmm. We wait in line, we deal with jerks at work, we act like jerks ourselves, we get tired and frustrated, and Mussar kind of helps us bring some awareness to those moments. And then, there's no greater opportunity for growth than a painful mistake. Right? We can beat ourselves up about it, or we can say, well, how can I learn from this? Like I have had some struggles with anger over the years, and there were times where I was working with someone and they did something that I didn't like, and I got so mad, and I sent off an email. And in your 20s, like people are, I think, more tolerant to that. But when you're getting to be like older and more experienced, people just don't want to deal with that. And like someone I was working with on my website, she was just like, you know what, this isn't working out, so let's just finish this project. And that was really too bad because, she did something I really didn't like, but did I have to get so angry that she didn't want to work with me anymore? So now I've really worked on that, and I've understood that, and I understand where that's coming from. And I've, through practice, where if I start seeing I'm getting that angry, it's like, okay, dude, you're not writing any emails. You're going to really...
Putting that space in between the match and the...
That's right. That's right. You're going to realize this isn't personal. You're going to ask for what you want. You're not going to imbue any intent on the other person. Because if I'm feeling attacked, that's my issue. That's not them. So it's like, no, it's not attacking. It's I don't know, am I waxing incoherent here, or are you still following me?
No, I totally am. I was just thinking how powerful of a shift this is mentally to just hear you describing that, because I was thinking how we really get set in those imbalances when we start to identify with them. Right. So in the past, you could have said, well, I'm just a red personality. I just am I'm an alpha male. I'm just an angry person. Right. I hear people say this kind of stuff all the time without recognizing, well, actually, it's just out of balance. It's not that that's who you are.
That's right. I just finished up a 3-month Mussar for Men class. It was the first time I ever did Mussar with men. And, these were CEOs, these were, VP types. And they really started to change.
Wow.
And they really started to be more thoughtful and considerate about how they were writing their emails. I kind of heard through the grapevine that their wives were like begging them to continue because they were growing up as like better husbands and fathers. And, they just didn't, someone was telling me, oh, he would have been mad for days about this, but he just let it go, without thought. So yeah, if someone says I'm an alpha male or I'm a type A personality, it's like, well, that's true today, but it's not true forever if you don't want it to be.
Wow. Oh, so good. So as Greg, I could just actually talk to you all day about this, because I'm kind of in that open the floodgates moment like you described in your journey, where you're like, give me everything to read on it. But I've just loved our conversation, and I wanted to really, bring this home as far as, the power that I see in this is that, and the reason why I was so excited to have you on the show is that we talk a lot about joyful living and what to do. And one of the biggest pieces that I have felt is missing in our society that limits us being able to live joyfully is skills. Like real skills that we can use and pull out when things are hard, or when things aren't going our way, or when those character traits are flaring up that are out of balance, like we've been discussing today. And so I was so grateful and excited for such an approachable practice that is truly accessible to anyone, no matter their belief or creed or anything. And so honestly, I got very excited in the book when you started to talk about having Mussar groups, that you would meet together and discuss the soul trait, and then you'd all go off for the next 2 weeks and do the practice of that trait and work on it, find where you're at on the spectrum, and you work on your own thing while your neighbor's working on theirs. And then you come back in 2 weeks and share what your struggles were and what your wins were, how things were changing, and then discuss the next soul trait. And so this idea just, it lit a fire in me, because I could see, I could invite my Christian neighbors down the street and my Muslim neighbors on the corner, and I could invite my atheist neighbors across the city, and we could all have this very powerful conversation about how can we become just better people? How can we be kinder to our families? How can we be, just bring out the best of ourselves, right? Stop hiding that light anymore. And I could see how that entire conversation would not only make each person better by being a part of it, but it would strengthen our community in a way that I really haven't seen many things yet that can. Because we can do lots of community initiatives and lots of cool things to bring people together. But when we're all coming together in the in the perspective of, I'm going to work on me, and I'm going to cheer you on and working on you too, and we're all cheering each other on and just being our best selves and having this common conversation of, this is what we value, right? And I feel like it's such a powerful conversation that can truly transform communities. And so I got excited about hosting my own Mussar group, which I'm planning to start very soon here within my neighborhood, which Greg has been so great to give me a lot of and connect me with some of his support tools he has. So if any of you are interested in doing that on any level, please reach out to Greg and he'll connect you and help you know how you can access some of those really powerful resources. But also, Greg and I decided to try something over the next few months. And so we're going to start on May 9th. Wednesday, May 9th, we are going to host a Mussar group online, and we'd love to invite any of you and the people in your world to join us. We are going to do this through Zoom and have it streamed through Facebook Live in my Joyful Living Facebook group. So make sure that you're a part of that group, and that you, if you're a part of that group, you'll for sure see the registration links listed there that are going to connect you in so that you can join us live, or you'll see the recordings posted there also so you can listen and watch them after. And if you're listening to this and it's years in advance from when we have delivered this, know that you can always go back in the Joyful Living Facebook group in the archives of videos, and you'll be able to find these videos. But starting May 9th, we're going to start with the very first virtue and talk through it and have some great conversation. And then we're all going to go off and work on it. And then we'll come back in 2 weeks and we'll have the next conversation with the next soul trait. And we'd love to hear what's working and what your struggles were, and just have a real community and conversation around these practices and just being better people and bringing more joy into your lives through practicing good actions in relation to these traits. So I'm so excited. And Greg, I hope you're so excited too.
I am too. I think this is just really awesome. And, it's something that I've thought about, but it's much easier to kind of get something like that going with a partnership. And having somebody to work with. And I just love the way you described it. It's about learning skills. And there's a passage that I once studied which talked about, a tailor needs to learn their craft, and a shoemaker needs to learn their craft, and someone who designs, does computer programs need to learn their craft. And we also need to learn the craft of being good people. Wow. We need to learn it's not like, there's this expectation that I should know this or it's common sense. Well, no, it's a skill that we can all learn and we can all get better at.
Oh, I love that. Love it so much. So before we close, I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions here in a minute. So be getting ready for that. But just in closing, I know, take some deep breaths. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my God. All right.
But I just wanted to connect all of you guys to also know that Greg's book, The Spiritual Practice of Good Actions, is available on Amazon.com and probably through your website, I'm sure, AmericanMussar.com. And it is phenomenal. I went through the first at least 100 pages within a matter of a couple hours because I couldn't put it down, and have just been taking it with me, tucking it in my purse to wherever I'm going, because I'm loving having this conversation with the people in my world, and especially loving showing them all the spectrums of, each of the soul traits and how that relates. It's opening up such cool conversation in my world. So I can't recommend the book enough. If you're going to be joining us in that Mussar practice, like we're hoping you will, on May 9th, the book will be a really powerful support tool. I mean, for sure you can come and join us and there will be some great insights, but if you had the book, it would just maximize your practice more. So if I were you, I would snag that before or as soon as you can. And then also be sure to join us. The specifics on the May 9th event is that we'll be meeting and it will be through the Joyful Living group, like we've mentioned, but it will be at 1 p.m. Pacific time. So you can kind of calculate whatever time zone you're in and set a timer on your phone or a reminder on your calendar now so that you don't miss that. And then know that we'll be doing it every 2 weeks thereafter through the end of June. And it's going to be so cool. So fun. Anything you'd like to add with that before we jump into rapid fire?
No, I think it's great. I mean, I'm it's great to try things. And I think it'll be really, really special to be able to create this level of community and connection in the Joyful Living Facebook group.
Yeah.
with your community.
Yeah. And
with my community, you are all invited to come as well. This is open, or if you're new to either community, come join the party.
Yes. I'm so excited. And on that note as well, I wanted to say a big reason why we did set it at the time we did was so that it would meet most time zones in the world, or a lot. And so hopefully that will line up with your time zone. And if not, then please continue. You can jump into the conversation in the Facebook group as well. So just by typing in your comments and talking through it there too. So we got good stuff planned. All right, Greg, you ready for rapid fire questions?
I'm ready.
Okay, so this is looking for specifically what joy looks and feels like in each of these specific areas. Okay, so the first area would be joy with friends.
Joy with friends is just like having a really interesting conversation with lots of laughter.
I love that too. So good. Okay, rapid fire number 2, joyful living with your family.
Joyful living with my family is just kind of being together with just kind of small talk and, some, again, like some laughter and playfulness.
Love it. How about joyful living with your spouse?
Joyful living with my spouse is kind of just the image that comes to mind is just holding hands.
I love that so much. How about joyful living with yourself? So solo time.
Joyful living with solo time. It's funny. The first image that came to mind was sitting there with the cat, but that's also not solo.
Well, I think that
I think for me, I have to say I really enjoy like just watching like science fiction TV shows.
So fun. I love that too. And not science fiction necessarily, although that's a fun genre, but I love just that unwinding and watching something fascinating. So fun. Okay, last one, joyful living with the divine.
Joyful living with the divine is just like a feeling of security. It's just like feeling that the divine has my back, and that whatever happens, God is there to hold my hand and help me get through it.
Gorgeous. Gorgeous. So now bringing all of this awesome, yummy conversation to a close, Greg, is there any closing thoughts that you'd like to share? Anything that you wish you could have shared and would love to bring into the conversation as we bring it to a close?
I just am very grateful for this invitation and for the enthusiasm that you've shown for kind of, joining the spiritual journey and joining this Mussar journey, for yourself and sharing it with your community. And, part of what I like to do is to work with people one-on-one. And if anyone would like to, you can come visit my website and sign up for a 1-hour strategy session, and you can come and I will listen and we'll try to map out what your ideal life might look like, and then start to strategize on what are some of the soul traits that are getting in the way, and what you can do to start to resolve them.
Oh, so powerful. Thank you for offering that. That's an amazing gift, by the way. Your schedule may get inundated. So that'll be first come, first served. No, I'm just teasing. But yeah. Well, Greg, it's just been a delight to have this conversation with you. And thank you to all of our amazing listeners for just opening up this space. I know this is kind of different and kind of new as far as different from a lot of the other things that we've talked about, but I think it's so different in so many good ways. So I'm excited about the conversations that's going to open up in our communities and how this work and this practice can benefit your joyful everyday life. So thank you again, Greg, for being on the show, and for those of you listening, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Bye for now. And in the end, only love will
You've been listening to Joyful Living. If you haven't already done so, be sure to email me at quinn@joyfullivingmovement.com so I can send you our yummy Joyful Living welcome package filled with lots of awesomeness, including access to our private Joyful Living network. I read every email from my listeners and would love to hear from you. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes, and most importantly, have a joy-filled day.